Then we're going to look at some country rankings and look at some patterns within East Asia, but also use the Environmental Performance Index from the Country Profile Assignment, one of the optional questions. And we can look at what is it that certain countries are good at environmentally, what are they bad at, and then further from that, try to understand a little bit more about human impact on the environment in each of these countries. So what we'll do is to start off, we're going to look at Japan. So go down, find your country. My case in this particular exploration is my country is Japan. So it's ranked 39th out of 180. So that's very good. It's in the top 25 percentile. We scroll down to the detailed viewed. Let's try to understand what are we looking at. So what we got on the left-hand side is different indicators. And throughout this website, you can peruse it, you can look at it, you can find bits and pieces of information or explanations for this various scores and data and bars and all of that. But I'm going to just quickly go through some of the basics. So we got these different indicators, and we got the scores. Then we have the rankings. So the rankings, if it's a low number, that means it's really, really good. If it's a high number, that means they're really, really bad. So further, we can kind of try to understand changes over time. So green bars mean they're doing good at that. That's a good thing. They're improving. They're top. They're very, very good. The orange means that they're not doing too well. They're struggling with that particular characteristic. And so further, I'd go ahead and click on peer set. If we click on the peer set, we then get compared to other countries that are similar in terms of wealth, but also regional. This is kind of a better way to balance things out and give us a better perspective as far as what they're doing good. In the case of Japan, we've got the long green bars here in terms of water resources. And so here, wastewater treatment. Very characteristic of a very wealthy country in which they're going to be good at dealing with their waste. So Japan, high income, very developed country. One way to showcase that is they got sophisticated wastewater treatment. You go down, also what are they good at? Forests. So if you go back to a previous video in which I showed land cover, particular patterns in Japan, you saw a lot of forested areas. So once again, wealthier countries, they don't need to clear their forests so they can turn it into agriculture to make some money. They already got the money. So we often see in high-income countries they're pretty good in terms of deforestation because they really don't need to. But what are they bad at? What is, in this case, Japan bad at? Agriculture. Essentially, any country that doesn't have a lot good going on for it agriculturally, like Japan, they have to add a lot of stuff to it. I mean, we're talking a lot of rugged terrain, and so anywhere they have agriculture, they add a lot of stuff to it. In case of this, fertilizer, nitrogen comes from fertilizer, comes from manure, comes from a variety of sources, and so it really speaks to how bad the agriculture is. But also, they can afford all the various techniques to add to it to make it at least somewhat viable and produce somewhat of a population or a self-sufficient crop. We'll talk about that later with rice. And so what are they also bad at? Fisheries, fish stocks. And so what's going on there is a certain type of tuna in which it's almost depleted. So it's a country that eats a lot of seafood, so that's kind of one of the things is serving their local market because they don't have a lot of grazing, they don't have a lot of steak, they don't have a lot of meats. So they use a lot of fish, and so they're overfishing in some regard. So that's Japan, some of the stuff that they're good at, some of the stuff they're bad at. But we see ranked number one, water and sanitation. But if you've ever been to Japan, their toilets are the real deal. They've got the most sophisticated toilets in the world. So once again, a high-income country, a wealthy country, makes sense that they're going to be ranked really good at stuff related to water, whether or not water going leaving our body or water coming into our body. Now let's go look at South Korea. South Korea ranked 80th, so pretty good. Not as good as Japan. So let's look at some of their characteristics. And so they're good at forests and fisheries. So unlike Japan, they're not overfishing their nearby Yellow Sea or the Korean Strait. They're not overfishing like the Japanese are. So they have maybe a little bit more variety in their diets. We could also allude from that as well. Other things in terms of water resources, very similar to Japan, a very well-developed, high-developed country. It makes sense we're going to have good wastewater treatment. Agriculture, similar as Japan, not a lot of agriculture here, so they have to kind of add a lot of nutrients. So that's one reason why they're bad. But you look at what they're really bad at, here is air quality. And so here, typical of developed countries, a lot of cars. If you think about Korea, South Korea, what are they good at? Making cars. So a lot of cars. being driven, a lot of industry, and so subsequently from that, a lot of pollution. So it's got a lot of the bad pollutions too, the NO2 and the PM2 2.5. The PM2.5 is very, very fine particles. I'll just come back and I'll talk about that with China, but that's not good. So you look at outdoor pollution, man, South Korea, they're very, very, very bad. But all that has to do with its very, very fast industrialization, which has happened over the last 20 years, but also they are car crazy. And we go down, we could also see that in terms of CO2 emissions. A lot of that's related to cars. We see that down in climate and energy. So that's kind of the quick 411 on South Korea. Now let's focus in on China, which 109th, that's not too good. That's in the bottom 50 percentile. So China, let's go ahead and kind of change up the stuff, change to the graphic view. China, wow, look how bad they are at air quality. 179, there's only 180 countries ranked in this, so very bad. Very bad, China, very bad at air pollution. And so we go ahead and click on that drop down. We can find out a little bit more. And so we're the worst. And I'm telling you, that's the worst stuff. That's the very, very small particulates that when it gets into your lungs, it's in your bloodstream, it ain't good. So that's not good for humans as well. So here, very big problem, which I'm going to further elaborate on. So China is one example where I'm going to further explain what's going on there in terms of the patterns. Other things they're bad at, agriculture. So nitrogen balance, and so we saw the North China Plain, the Northeast China Plain. So there, agriculture is such a huge part of China, and they add a lot of fertilizers. You got a lot of nitrogen being added from the air, but also from rain, but also from cow poop. So there's a variety of ways in which nitrogen's added, but it's in this case, not too good for China. So some things they're good at: water resources, wastewater treatment. Once again, countries that have a little bit of wealth, you can kind of do that. So that's kind of the quick 411 on China. So when we look at China, let's try to understand, well, what's going on with this air pollution problem?